rephrase this. Hello, my name is Luciana Williams, and I am filling in for Lisa and Christoph, who couldn't be here. I decided to go full over the top here, because I was like, I need to be like as fabulous and ridiculous as possible if I'm going to be lit enough for Clash. So I'm really excited about all of these readers. Obviously, we have the Zombie Punks anthology. That's going to be very exciting. A couple of the writers are here, and a bunch of diverse voices. You know, what I like about Clash is there's a bunch of different types of people. There's you know, weirdos like Jeff, who are kind of anarchist and a little wild punk rock. There's me, you know, hosting this thing, you know, crazy Satanist trans woman. There's Sam, who makes us all cry. Wrath, who's like scary and romantic. But yeah, no, I'm really excited. The first reader is going to be Joe Quenell, right? That's how you pronounce that? And Joe lives in Washington State and writes. Their short fiction has appeared in the Clash books / Weird Punks anthology, Zombie Punks Fuck Off, Dark Moon Digest, and a forthcoming Laser Mall. I'm really excited. Give a hand for Joe. Woo!
This one's called Killing Spiders. M's phone rang the second the fat cocksucker scuttled up from the basement. We both left the couch. M bolted to the front door and slid on her boots, stammering into the receiver. I approached the intruder, raid in hand. As M stepped into the bone-piercing cold, I blasted my victim with poison. The door slammed while the fucker writhed, seizing before curling into a husk. Another corpse decorating the beige carpet. Destry moaned from the corner, squirming in his mattress. His blanket lay on the floor and he shivered despite his feverish sweat. I lifted the blanket and shook, evacuating any unwelcome guests, then draped it over him. His hurt foot dangled off the mattress, raw and twisted. The infected bite slicked pus. The basement step breaking under his foot was unfortunate. The nest beneath was a cruel coincidence. Destry squinted at me, muttering nonsense. I tried responding when the door opened. "Jed," M said, leaning in. Something in her cobalt eyes chilled me. She nodded for me to join her, so I zipped up my heavy coat and slipped on my shoes, checking them first for intruders. The snow outside our safe house formed a sprawling, solid sheet, burying Destry's getaway car. M pulled smokes and a lighter from her jacket, passing me a cigarette. We lit up, staring out at the surrounding flatlands. "So do you say why it took 3 fucking days to call?" M exhaled, ignoring my question. "He says we did good. Well, that I did." I grimaced. "Good? We didn't even leave with money. Wasn't that the point?" "Point was to follow instructions. Instructions changed. I followed them." M scratched at her peroxide scalp. "Simple. I remember the text Metzger sent in the bank's foyer. Kill them all and run. I remember my gun becoming dead weight in my hands and thinking it had to be a sick joke. Then M opened fire and everything became dead serious." I smoked and shuddered, screams echoing in my mind. "So what now?" M tossed her filter into the snow. "We leave tonight. Metzger wants us there by dawn for training." She smiled all wrong. "We're in." I motioned to the safe house. "He's not going anywhere other than a hospital. Should have gone days ago. He's gonna lose that leg." M lit another smoke, her face unaffected. "He's not going." I paused, thinking I'd heard wrong. "What?" "He's no use anymore. He stays." I felt nauseous. "And he's our friend. He's hurt. He needs..." What was Metzger's deal? M's voice was ice, her glare a dagger. "I'm serious, Jed. Remind me." My heart thudded. I sweat despite the cold. Business comes first. And failure to follow instruction leads to termination. Right. And blue smoke plumes from her nostrils. Metzger says he stays, so he stays. We stood in silence. My voice cracked when I spoke. So we leave him here to die. No. Em smiled humorlessly. You broke orders. She expelled her smoke. But Metzger's giving you a second chance. I ignored Destria's rambling and pulled the pillow from under his head. His sweat soaked the case. My hands trembled and I wished I was dying instead. Em stared at me, waiting for me to act. A minute passed, then another. I remained frozen, useless. She sighed, stormed over, and snatched the pillow. We'll tell Metzger you followed through, she said. My orders, otherwise, I really don't want to do them. So lucky you, I guess. I rushed aside, turning as Destria's garbled nonsense became muffled panic. I sat on the couch, cupping my ears to drown out the sound of thrashing. Another cocksucker ascended from the basement, scuttling across the living room. I eyed the raid, considering the kill, but instead let the fucker be. I'm not much of a killer in the end. Thanks.
Oh my god, that was amazing. Do you mind if I hold that book real quick?
Yeah, this was in Dark Moon Digest.
Oh, that's really cool. You're gonna be in the Zombie Punks anthology, right?
Yep, that was in that, yeah.
That's badass. But I am like really fucking hyped to see what Raph does next, especially since I don't know if you saw his story at the panel where he was talking about how he tried to fuck a Nazi and his dick like got like an infection and shit and it's all swollen up and he almost probably died. Like herpes. I mean that's pretty badass, right? That someone would like almost die trying to fuck a Nazi, you know? That's like the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm not gonna lie.
Follow-up question, all right? You said skinhead in Philadelphia. You certain the skinhead's a neo-Nazi or a shark?
So he was not sharp, but
Okay.
he also claimed not to be a racist. So I assume that she also was not a racist.
Not racist.
Cannot confirm that. Did not care.
Well, whatever happened with them? Did you get mad that you were?
He got really pissed off because apparently he had a huge crush on her, and he's like, I've been trying to get with her for 2 years. She walks into the restaurant to meet me, and you just go up to her, hey, you want to go out? And she fucking just goes out with you, and you fuck her in the grass. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't even.
Did he ask her out ever?
I don't know if he did.
God, that's so fucking beautiful. So, I gotta introduce Raph now, but I feel like I almost don't have to at this point. But Raph James White is a former world-class heavyweight kickboxer, a professional kickboxing and mixed martial arts trainer, distance runner, performance artist, and former street baller who is now known for creating some of the most disturbing works of fiction in print. So I'll just call him up if I ever need to like get someone, you know, the shit beaten out of someone, you know. Come and read your shit. Yes. Yeah, give it up for Raph.
All right, so this story is actually, it's in my book, like Porno for Psychos. It's actually one of the first stories I ever got published. It was published in Delirium webzine, which was Shane
Staley.
Shane Staley, yeah. It's called Nothing Better to Do. Freddie was bored again. Slowly, he slid slivers of wood into his anus, shivering as the pain lanced up through his spine. He wasn't quite sure why he was doing it, but he had nothing better to do. And it did take his mind off the soul-numbing boredom of life. He'd read that they'd found 6-inch metal pins embedded in Albert Fitch's rectum when they examined him after his capture. Freddy couldn't quite find any pins that long, but he did have some pretty long sewing needles. They didn't give him the type of chills the splinters did, though. The splinters set all his nerves on fire. Today, however, they just weren't doing the trick. Freddy started to chew his nails, but there was no nail and little flesh left on his half-cannibalized phalanges. White bones stuck out from the top of each savaged finger. Freddy started chewing bits of dried and dead skin from his index finger, wincing every time his teeth scraped bone. That's when he heard the dog, that oversized, arthritic, asthmatic poodle with the bleeding sores and the whooping cough that seemed to have been around forever. It was still alive. Freddy cursed aloud and slapped his hands over his ears to black out that horrible sound. Still, he could hear the dog's phlegm-choked, tubercular cough coming from the next room, followed by a hoarse, ragged bark that led predictably back to a fit of coughing. Freddy wanted to yell at the dog to spit that damn phlegm out instead of continuing to swallow it. Just the thought of it made him ill. That wet, strangled cough was the worst sound Freddy could imagine. It made his stomach roll with nausea and grated on his nerves, making him want to scream. Freddy began nervously chewing at his own bleeding nubs, ignoring the sharp prickles of pain that each bite sent through his nervous system. Freddy blamed all his obsessive-compulsive behaviors on that mutant poodle. He had been torturing it for years, and it still would not die. It still whispered in his ears every night, planning post-hypnotic suggestions like shove splinters in your anus or chew off your fingertips. He hated the thing. Once, Freddy had been looking through an old photo album and had been surprised to see that damn dog in almost every picture going back to his great-great-grandmother. He could not help but to think about David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, who had claimed that his neighbor's dog was a 1,000-year-old demon who ordered him to kill. His grandparents had once lived next door to David Berkowitz. They'd lived right there around the time of the son of Sam rampaging across New York. Freddy was afraid that soon the dog would have enough control over him to make him a murderer too. He had to kill the damn thing. He'd taken a knife to it again yesterday, yet the thing was still breathing and barking and coughing and eating and shitting all over the house. Determined to end the poodle's dominion over his life, Freddy leapt from his bed, wincing as the needles in his asshole dug in deeper. He carefully bandaged his fingers, wrapping each torn appendage with pieces of toilet paper, not noticing that they were just as quickly bleeding through the makeshift band-aids. No more poison, no more guns, no more knives. Freddy would make sure the thing did not survive. He would burn it to death. Freddy opened the door to his bedroom and walked out into the hallway, cursing aloud as he stepped directly into the wet green and brown feces that covered every floor surface in the house. Fucking dog, he growled to himself. He had to cover his face with a bath towel as the horrible, rancid pork smell of the half-dead, diseased dog mixed with the smell of feces and roared up his nostrils, down his throat and into his stomach, where it caused a tidal wave of bile and stomach acid. Freddy paused for a second as he fought to keep the wave from rising up his throat. Once his stomach was settled, he cautiously negotiated the obstacle course of dog shit and made his way to the kitchen where he knew the terrible creature would be. "Hi, Mom," Freddy said, and dutifully bent over and planted a kiss on her withered cheek. The movement disturbed the legion of flies that had been planting eggs in her eye sockets and feeding on the cocktail of bodily fluids evacuating her body. Her hair was moving, alive with maggots and still more flies. Her entire body was vibrating, seething with activity as dozens of carrion-eating parasites were busily eating away at her flesh, taking her down to the bone. Freddy yelled and kicked at the dog when he noticed that it had chewed off another of his mother's feet, taking most of the flesh from her one remaining shin as well. The dog yelped and retreated, dragging yards of bluish-purple intestines with it from where Freddy had tried to disembowel it last year. As it barked, its brain flopped back and forth, threatening to spill from its exposed brain pan. Freddy had taken a few swings at it with a baseball bat sometime around Christmas. Its matted and filthy white fur was dotted with red from all the bullet holes Freddy had put into it over the years, and the hilt of a carving knife still protruded from its throat from Freddy's recent attempt to saw the damn thing's head off. The hideously grotesque canine growled at him and backed away as he approached, limping and tripping over its own intestines and leaking blood and bile all over the linoleum floor, adding to the mess already left by the piles of excrement from the dog and Freddie's dead mother. Freddie could still remember the flood of urine and shit that had been released from his mom's bowels when he shot her as she tried to protect that damn poodle. He's been in the family forever. You can't kill it. I know it's been here forever. And don't you think there's something wrong with that? The damn thing won't die. Just look. He pointed the .357 Smith & Wesson revolver at the oversized mutant poodle, and his mother bent down to shield the thing. The bullet entered somewhere around mid-back and exited her solar plexus in an explosion of gore. She sat at the table, smoking one of those cheap generic cigarettes that smelled like charcoal, and berating him for being a failure as she slowly bled to death. He listened to her vituperative tirade, each venomous word barely squeezing out between wheezing, whistling breaths from her ruptured lungs as they filled with blood and she slowly drowned. Her last words were something like, "You pathetic waste of life. You should have been a stain in your daddy's sheets, and don't you dare hurt my dog." Immediately, Freddie had increased his efforts to kill the thing. The canine abomination was now feeding off the only thing in the house that had ever loved it. "Ungrateful son of a bitch," as she tried to protect you, Freddie yelled. "She tried to protect you." The dog sat and began licking its ass in response. There was a can of lighter fluid in the pantry, and Freddie bent to retrieve it. The dog began to howl and bark before succumbing to a horrific fit of coughing. It scrambled to the back door and scratched the cheap aluminum, trying to claw right through it to freedom. It could sense that Freddie was up to something. Freddie had the lighter fluid, the automatic log lighter, and a devilish gleam in his eyes. He backed the dog into the corner and began dousing it with accelerant. "Don't do it, Freddie. You'll be sorry. I'll make you skin your own penis with a cheese grater tomorrow if you fuck with me." Freddie was used to the threats. He didn't care what the dog said. This would be its last day on Earth. Freddie threw the match. He turned to get the fire extinguisher from under the sink as the dog began to howl and scream in indescribable agony. There was definitely something odd about that dog. Normal canines didn't scream, or talk for that matter, or live after they'd been stabbed, shot, bludgeoned, and disemboweled. The dog was trying to bite at the flames. Its teeth were bared in a threatening snarl as it attacked the immediate source of its pain. The fire rapidly crawled up its back, shearing through the mangy tufts of hair as it began to consume the dog's living tissue. The little fat still clinging to the dog's emaciated body added fuel to the fire and furthered the progress of the flames. The poodle's flesh was starting to bubble and run like frying lard. Both its eyes were sizzling in their sockets like sunny-side-up eggs. They exploded with an audible pop. Freddie sprayed the dog with a fire extinguisher as soon as it stopped moving. He had to spray the walls as well as the fire had begun to spread up the drywall. Freddie cried out in joy as the blackened canine skeleton slumped to the floor. He negotiated his way through the festering piles of feces, back out of the kitchen, down the hall, and into his bedroom, pausing only to silence the wailing smoke alarms with a few whacks from his baseball bat. The house was now eerily quiet, without the horrible coughing and hoarse barks. The only sound was the hum of flies on his mother's body, audible even through his closed bedroom door. Strangely enough, he found the sound soothing. It was like Mom was humming him to sleep with some out-of-tune lullaby. Freddie laid down on his bed and felt years of pressure suddenly drop from his mind. The demon was dead. He fell into a deep, contented sleep and dreamt of being a baby in his mother's arms, trying to remember what the milk from her mammoth breasts had tasted like. When Freddie finally awakened hours later, it was to the same hoarse barking and wet, tubercular, phlegm-congested coughing that had greeted him every morning of his life. His left ear dripped with snot and saliva from where the wet nose of a 1,000-year-old demon, the same one who had told David Berkowitz to take a .44 caliber pistol to couples on the streets of New York, had whispered in his ear as he slept. The ratty carpet had a trail of paw prints and black ash that led from his locked bedroom door to the edge of his bed. The damn thing had picked the lock again. Freddie cursed loudly as he reached for the cheese grater and began shredding the foreskin from his penis. He wasn't sure why he was doing it, but he had nothing better to do.